Alrighty, it's time for another reaction time. This time we're looking at an article from Collider on the 10 most important superhero movies of all time. Timing on this is really good because I just happened to rewatch Superman the movie last night with the whole family, and they were largely interested. They paid attention to a lot of it. Eventually we started to play a little bit of a game while we were watching it because their attention was strained by it. But we watched one movie that is on this list. I've already looked ahead. This is a solid list. I haven't gone through what my exact ranking would be. I haven't gone through to pick my 10 movies that I would say are the 10 most important. But my list would shuffle these ones around. It would not be radically different from their list. I didn't immediately think to myself, that doesn't belong here, and where is this movie? This is a solid list. This is probably the closest, if I were to make my own list of these reaction times that I've done, this is the closest one to just being my list right out of the gate. First movie on the list, coming in at number 10, they have Blade from 1998, and this is a film that did several really important things. That at a time when the comic book movie genre was, first off, Marvel had never had a hit movie in the theaters. They'd never had a profitable movie in the theaters before. You know, Howard the Duck had come out. I don't know, maybe that was profitable, but not well regarded at all. But then, yeah, Captain America, Punisher, Fantastic Four, like these things, one of them wasn't even released. Two of them went straight to video. Marvel had never had a hit in the theater before. Right there, Blade is the first profitable Marvel comic book movie to hit theaters. Right there, that's important. But also, key thing in this, Blade was not, and really is not, this A-list Marvel comic book character. When people think about Blade, they don't go, here's my favorite comic book. They think of Wesley Snipes. And what's important there is that it made it very clear that you can make a hit comic book movie out of a character that people have never heard of. That's actually really important. And that's what this movie proved. You make a good movie with a great concept. You find a comic that has a great concept. You can make a hit movie out of it, even if the comic itself is B, C tier, which will be an important detail when we get to another one on here that's very high up on this list. But they made a great movie at the right time with the right influences. There was a genre blender, but genres that merged well. And it was also beyond just being first profitable Marvel comic book movie in the theaters. Also, it was on the cutting edge of bringing Hong Kong style martial arts choreography to Hollywood. So on so many different levels, yes, this one belongs here. Also, because of where the comic book movie genre was at, that all these Superman 5 movies had fallen through, Batman and Robin, not well received. And then you get this movie that's a hit, and you start laying the foundation for the modern era of comic book movies. That I would say starts with the next, I don't know if it's next on this list, one we'll get to very soon, but starts in the year 2000 and really takes off in the year 2002. And it's Marvel was that next era. I wouldn't say Blade is the one that kicks it off, but it's the one that kind of cut the path so that others could run down it and lead us into a modern era of a comic book movie that was a hit, that was more serious, that handled it kind of differently, and it became an actual era where Batman, Superman came out before this. But it was like comic book movies came out one every 5 years, or one new franchise every 5-10 years, and most of them didn't work. So absolutely agree on this one, and appreciate that something that wasn't a mega hit is on the list. Next up, okay, it is the next one on the list, is XMen 2000. That in terms of box office, of people's favorite X-Men movie, X-Men 2000, generally speaking, is lower on the list. That most people believe X-Men 2 is a better film, or Days of Future Past, Logan, Deadpool. There are better X-Men films. And there's X-Men movies that made more money. But this is the first big hit for a Marvel movie. And Blade, D-list Marvel character. Absolutely from Marvel Comics, but Blade in no way is one of the faces of Marvel. The X-Men are. And the X-Men had a huge hit show on Fox Kids in the previous decade. And one of the big names of Marvel Comics that people think, Marvel Comics, they think X-Men. And they put out a movie, and it was good, and it was a hit. And so for me, the modern era of comic book movies started with X-Men, where since the year 2000, since this movie came out, we've consistently gotten big tentpole blockbuster comic book movies pretty much every single year. So completely agree on this one. This movie kicked off the modern era of comic book movies. Blade cut the path. This one established it. Moving right along. Number 8, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This is a tricky one for me. If our most important superhero movies, how do you define important? Because there's so many things about this movie I adore. So many things about it so special. It just is an animated movie. It's a great work of art. It's a great celebration of Spider-Man. It's just a great movie. All those things are true. How do we define important? Because if you say most influential, it's not. Like, what has Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse influenced? I don't know. What has it influenced? And maybe it's more influential in the world of animation than even it is in the world of comic book movies or things like that. Maybe it's popularized Spider-Gwen to the mainstream a little bit more. I know that's true with my kids. So that's where my mind immediately goes. Should this is the one that I think I would be most likely to cut from this list of, does it belong here? I don't know. Like, once again, I have praised this movie extensively. I'm not questioning its greatness. But is it most important? I'm not sure. But also, when you make a great Spider-Man movie that's a special animated film, that's just a great movie in general, that's cutting edge on all these different levels of storytelling and everything, that's important in and of itself. So maybe it does belong here. If you're talking about ranking based on importance, you cannot convince me that this movie is more important than the movie that kicked off the modern era of comic book movies. So without question, I think would have to have this one in last on this list. I don't know what I would replace it in the top 10, but this is the one that I would question the most. Great movie, not questioning its greatness. Number 7 on here, Batman 1989. And if you're my age, you remember Batmania. It's tough now to describe just how much popular culture was dominated by Batman in 1989 and the just ripples throughout culture that you had at the time. Because now that the impact of this one movie you had in 1989 is spread across all of the comic book movies. So you go to McDonald's and you'll have your Captain America toys in February, and then you'll have your Fantastic Four toys in July, followed by your Superman toys that same month. So the impact of any one is spread across all of them. They all kind of have their impact. But we didn't get 5 comic book movies in 1989. We had one. And they did all the stuff. The toys, t-shirts, McDonald's, collector's cups, everything. Behind the scenes, everything. It was the trading cards. I've got, literally, here we are, 36 years later, and here are my trading cards for this movie. That's the ripples of the impact of this movie, the influence of this movie. And one of the ways that that doesn't get referenced quite enough, Hollywood kind of got the wrong message from Batman 89. That if you look at the number of comic book movies as we think of them now that came after Batman 89, it didn't really happen. They didn't do Superman 5. They didn't do Superman and Batman. They didn't do World's Finest. And Marvel didn't get anything off the ground for another decade. But what did happen is there was a revival of these pulp era comics. The Rocketeer, The Shadow, The Phantom, Dick Tracy. There was this whole era that kind of had some aesthetic similarities that were going back to the 1940s. That did happen. There were all these movies that came out because of Batman 89. Hollywood just took a really weird lesson from Batman 89. Number 6, Spider-Man 2002. And if Blade in 1998 kind of cut the path for a modern era, X-Men established it, Spider-Man was the one shouting, we're doing, like, things are different now. We are in a new era where X-Men was a big hit. Spider-Man was a mega hit. Like, biggest opening weekend, the word biggest starts being used with Spider-Man in a way it wasn't used for X-Men. And, like, and even on a technological level of the scope and size, the speed of the swinging sequences, they reached a point in time where you could start doing these incredible things and just have them in your movie. And that means you can do all these other characters. We figured it out. We've cracked the code. And we can start experimenting and going bigger and fancier. So there's so many ways where this is an important film. That this was a cultural event like Batman in 1989. That now Marvel has not just had their hit movie, they've had their Spider-Mania, their Batmania moment. That like a comic book movie hadn't really had this at this point in time in almost 15 years, 13 years since 1989. Batman Returns kind of did it, but that one like had all this other stuff that went along with it. There was the controversy because it was too dark. They tried to repeat it, and it didn't quite happen. Spider-Man did make it happen. It was a huge hit film, so absolutely belongs on this list. Number 5, Avengers Endgame. Not terribly surprising that Endgame would be on this list. It's tough to say where it should go, though. Because in my mind, I think when I think of important, I do think of the ripples, the impact that it had, what came afterwards. And Endgame is this other thing, because Endgame was the culmination of a 10-year-long plan, 11-year-long plan that took 22 movies to get there. So this movie kicked it off. This movie was an event. This movie did this. And Endgame was the opposite end of this, where Batman petered out and Spider-Man kind of, in its own way, didn't end. It was a trilogy that ended, but didn't end on a high note. And Avengers Endgame was the high note of this 11-year saga. And became, for briefly, the highest grossing movie of all time. It's in that category that it's just it and Avatar that are right there around $3 billion. When you've done that, you're so far ahead of the number 2 highest grossing comic book movie of all time. Yeah, you're important. You belong on this list. It's not just, it's the biggest by a lot. And it was a cultural event like Batman 89, like Spider-Man 2002, but as an end, as a culmination, as a thing that pulled everything together, and us as a society watched a shared universe actually pull it off and do it. So I don't know where you put that one on. It's a little bit tricky for me because I'm biased towards beginnings. And I think this is the only one on here that is a culmination, an end. I don't know where I'd put it. But, yeah, anyway, obviously, tremendous achievement. Number 4 on here, you have the First Avengers. And this one, if you weren't there, if you're younger, if you kind of got on board with Marvel after the Avengers came out and these team-ups became commonplace, you might be like, what on earth? I mean, Endgame made twice as much as this film. Why would this one be ahead of it? Because this is the movie where we first did a team up. Now, these happen all the time now. But this is the first time you had a big event team up and it worked. And it took the Marvel Cinematic Universe from being like, yeah, these hit comic book movies, and made it into the dominant cultural event, or, you know, just ubiquitous in culture that it has been since well, I don't know that it is still now, but that it was for about a decade. And maybe they can get back to it. And right now they're like, you know, trying to get back to it and lingering a little bit. But this movie, you might watch it now if you weren't there, and you can be like, it feels quaint, it feels small stakes, you can see a little bit of the cheesiness in it, too much of the Joss Whedonisms. I gotcha. I understand what you're saying. But we're talking about important. Not does it hold up. When you're talking about important, yeah, this movie this movie is the reason we could do Endgame. So since this piece came first, I think it has to, you got to do this one if you want to talk about Endgame elsewhere on this list. This one set the path for it. This cracked the code. This one pulled it off. Number 3 on our list, Superman 1978. I have a hard time not having this one at number 1. Once again, my bias is towards beginnings. This is the original comic book movie blockbuster. I rewatched it last night, and it operates on a different level than every other movie on this list. Now, you can debate the merits of the cornier elements, the dated elements. Do the effects hold up? Is there a certain lack of sophistication in Lex Luthor's plan? Gotcha. I understand what you're saying. But you also watch the first 50 minutes of it before the star of our movie even shows up. Is 50 minutes. And just the scope, scale, sense of importance, it kicks off after this incredible sweeping kickoff of our credits. Goes to Krypton, and just the music that it's playing as we slowly fly into Krypton, it's just on this whole other level. And if this movie didn't work, who knows what the comic book movie genre would have been. It is the movie that invented the genre. Kevin Feige himself has made statements saying every time we start a new project, we go back and we rewatch this movie because it invented the template. This is the one that cracked the code and figured it out. So I have a hard time not having this one at number 1. I'd have this at number 1. That's the way I am. But there's some other big ones on here that are pretty important too. Our runner-up, The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan's film. As if you didn't know it was Christopher Nolan's film. This is a tough one for me. I have a hard time with this being number 2 on the list. Not because I think sorry. I have another. Nope, that's it. All right. I had another can in here somewhere. Now I'm going to start burping because of a freshly carbonated beverage poured down my throat. Not because I question Christopher Nolan, the quality of the film, anything like that. We're talking about important. I tie importance to influence and things like that, the ripples. And if you're just talking about the trajectory of Christopher Nolan and Christian Bale's careers, things like that, Heath Ledger winning a posthumous Oscar. If you look at it from that perspective, it's really important. And I don't remember if it was right after this came out that they expanded the Best Picture nominees from 5 to 10, and some of that's because they wanted to be able to acknowledge a movie like The Dark Knight, that we're not going to give The Dark Knight the Oscar, but we want to be able to say it was nominated. I like there's things like that it did have some influence. But also, if you look at like the importance of kicking off Marvel in theaters, Well, that didn't really happen with The Dark Knight. You know, it was the sequel to the Batman Begins. So the franchises had already started. The franchise was already successful. There'd already been Superman movies, and it didn't lead to its own franchise beyond its sequel. Like it was meant to be an enclosed trilogy. That's why when you say important, what's our definition? And the definitions that I gravitate towards, The Dark Knight would not be in the top 5 on this list. If we're talking about just ranking them based off what's the best movies, hey, I'm not going to argue putting this one very high up on the list. You can put it in the top 5. We're not going to get into it. But if you're talking about important, I struggle with having The Dark Knight above Superman the movie that invented the genre, or Spiderman that kicked off, like, made Marvel Comics this titan to behold, or things like that really were these events and were important for the genre. The Dark Knight was too, but not as like this landmark. Things changed as soon as this movie came out. What changed with comic book movies because The Dark Knight came out? And I think you can think of some examples of they put out some darker things like that. But compared to the next movie on this list and how things changed when that movie came out, I don't think I would say that about The Dark Knight. So when you say important, your definition matters. And that's where I go with it. Iron Man coming in at number 1, almost certainly the argument here being, this is the movie that kicked off the Marvel Cinematic Universe that has become the largest movie franchise of all time by a lot, that generated briefly the highest grossing movie of all time, that is now in the modern era the most prolific movie franchise. It's now a multimedia franchise. It took Robert Downey Jr., who was a has-been, and made him the biggest movie star on the planet. It created the craze of shared universes, that shared universes were like fun little novelties. Like, look, we did Freddy vs. Jason. Look, Alien vs. Predator. That's what shared universes were before. Or characters on one NBC police procedural showed up on a different NBC procedural. That was what shared universes were. And then this movie came out and said, DC, we got to do this now too. And we tried to do it with a monster universe, and like just became, everybody wants a shared universe. And it goes back to Iron Man, and they cracked the code on how to do this right. So how do you pick what's the number 1 most important? I don't know. My bias is towards the one that kicked the whole genre off, so Superman the movie. But if you're not doing Superman the movie, yeah, I think I would go Iron Man. Like, I think there's a strong argument, very strong argument. Iron Man is the one that has so obviously been crucial to the genre. Just when you think about the genre, you cannot do it without immediately thinking about the franchise that this one started off, the template that it created, that everyone has copied. So, Iron Man, I don't think it would be my number 1. But it'd probably be my number 2. So I'm okay with their pick. Black Panther should be on here for being the first mega hit comic book movie starring an African American. Maybe Wonder Woman should have been on here for being the first female-led mega hit comic book movie. I would agree. I would boot Into the SpiderVerse for either one of those movies. I would. Like I see that and immediately go, yeah. I mean, I think, when you, in terms of doing something that for the genre was really important, that moved the needle, I think either one of those movies for the genre itself, both those movies moved the needle quite a bit more. Which one would I pick over the other? I don't know. I don't have to, because that's not what I'm doing right here, but I think this is a great pick. Maybe I'll lean Black Panther because it was nominated for Best Picture. And so as soon as you are talking about getting a Best Picture nomination and being incredibly important for a large group of people, made over $1 billion on the basis of that, you've done something very important. But yeah, either one of those movies I would put in over Into the Spider-Verse. Would I put both of them on the list? I'm not sure. I don't know what I would kick out. And if you're like, you start getting into the playing around games with, you kind of go, Blade was the first hit movie starring an African American. Black Panther, you're doing a little bit of this, like which one's the mega hit versus hit. Best Picture, do I kick out Blade because this one, so we can have the one that was dominant for women? I don't know what I would do with that. But what about the 60s Batman movie? It was an adaptation of a TV show. It was quite literally between seasons 1 and 2. They did a movie that is a bigger and better production than the episodes, but not a categorically different production. It was not a modern day blockbuster of its time. Like it was, let's do a couple episodes, 3 episodes with more budget. But Superman the movie was the most expensive movie of all time when it came out. They went, we're gonna, like, people love Superman, we're gonna adapt it, and they went and they got Mario Puzo, who did The Godfather, to write the first draft. And then, so he does the big gigantic thing, and they brought in Tom Mankiewicz, who worked on a decade's worth of James Bond movies, to come in and like, okay, like, Mario, he's got the scope. Now, can you make this a movie that we can actually make? So Tom Mankiewicz comes in and he rewrites it as a special producer credit or something like that. But really, he's the guy that made the script that was shootable. And they did like things that was unheard of. They hired 2 of the biggest actors on the planet, Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman. 2 like massive actors. Gene Hackman in particular is like right on his hot streak, and they put him in this movie. That's so categorically different from 1960s Batman, which was a TV show that they made a movie out of it. I feel like Man of Steel should be included in this list. I don't know. What do you kick out for Man of Steel, and how is it more important than that movie? Kicked off the DCEU, but Man of Steel in and of itself was not that big of a hit of a film. Like, it did well enough that obviously it continued, but it wasn't like a $1 billion film. It kicked off a franchise that was never really that well regarded. The reviews for it weren't that great. So what about it would make it more important than the movies I just listed? It wasn't the first Superman movie ever. What is it that would make it more important than those?